Welcome to the Community Clubs Victoria podcast. I'm John Deeks, and today it's a meeting of minds. We have Andrew Lloyd, the Community Clubs Victoria CEO, along with today's special guest, Craig Shannon, the CEO of ClubsACT. Welcome, Craig.
Good afternoon, John.
Great to have you with us today, explaining to Deeksy the amazing work that you do in your state and your community clubs, what they mean to the community, what they give back. Yesterday in Victoria, announcements to do with landmark gaming reforms and rolling out the compulsory carded play. There's stats that are being bandied around that we feel are rubbery. There's issues to do with facial recognition technology. So let's chat about all those today.
First up, Craig, can you tell us a bit about the role of clubs in the local economy at this time?
We're a very significant player in the ACT economy. I mean, for those of you who are listening who know what the ACT is like, we're a bit of a city-state effectively within New South Wales, but we're one of the largest employer groups in the ACT. Our industry is all not-for-profit, so everything that we do generates return back to the community directly. We are the main provider largely of non-governmental green space for community use. So over 500 hectares of ovals and park facilities that are generally used for community sport in the ACT. In fact, I think it'd be fair to say community sport couldn't operate in the ACT without our industry. As one of the larger employer groups as well, there's been a generation of talent for the world coming through the universities into the club sector for employment and then on to their futures as surgeons or lawyers or whatever else. We were not a pub culture in Canberra like New South Wales was, so clubs have been a pretty key part of the hospitality existence of the ACT.
How different is it operating a not-for-profit club out of the ACT as opposed to other states?
I think it's a significant difference, and it also provides nuance into what it really should be about. We've got a very big difference between a for-profit venue and a not-for-profit venue in terms of the way they view their patrons and the way they see the purpose of their existence. At the end of the day, all of our members exist only to serve the community. They're either largely registered associations or they're companies that live by guarantee and have objectives that are there to serve the community. In fact, most of the negative media that's taken place in regards to the poker machine issue, for instance, over recent years has been driven by for-profit players. When you compare a casino or a pub, for instance, that has some poker machines in New South Wales, their purpose of having those machines and the incentive potentially to do the wrong thing by their patrons is a lot higher than it would be in our environment.
Look, 100%, Craig. And look, the difference in our jurisdiction in Victoria is that the average number of EGMs in a gaming room in a club in Victoria is just 54 EGMs. So it is a totally different model to a casino. We become despondent sometimes that we're put into the same category, the same risk factor as a casino-type organisation. When there's so many harm minimisation measures, there's staff training, there's the whole ecosystem to protect people. And there's a lot of intersecting issues for us to discuss, and we've only got a short time to chat about it today. But even the online space for online gambling apps, I signed up to one recently. Seriously, it was a minute sign up, and then you can link your Google Pay, transfer money from your bank account, boom, straight into the app. So you spend thousands of dollars at a time. There's no protections the same as in a venue where you've got properly trained staff, CCTV on every poker machine, cash out limits, self-exclusion protections, which we wish people would understand and appreciate.
Well, as you know, Andrew, I mean, certainly the line that we've put very forcefully to government in the ACT is that our members are the only pathways for intervention to a problem gambler that actually exist out in the community. Otherwise, gambling is effectively done in the dark or at home, where people get no access to pathways for intervention. No one's oversighting their behaviour patterns. No one's going up and saying, are they okay? And the problem is a lot of the worst excesses of the debates that we're dealing with at the moment in terms of proposed regulation have largely been driven out of, in one case, the casino culture, where all those boards effectively evaded any form of accountability for presiding over money laundering and other matters going on in their venues. And then the other debate in New South Wales, particularly in recent times, coming from the Crimes Commission report into money laundering there, where it found that poker machines were being used for that purpose. And as you know, Andrew, New South Wales has a very large number of pub facilities with poker machines in them as compared to clubs. But the worst problem from my point of view is that our industry keeps getting tagged with the bad outcomes that are being created in other parts of the economy. And I think it's a disservice to the community.
Totally agree. Craig, can we just move on and chat about the carded play and cashless? So there's been trials in New South Wales We've been watching what's happening in Tasmania. The announcement yesterday in Victoria, our government wants to push ahead and essentially replicate what has been put in place in the Melbourne casino. We've got some concerns from a technical capacity perspective, which we want to flesh out and share with the government, but also we're concerned, obviously, to do with that not a casino. They don't have the same risk factor. Right now, people have to sign into the club, put their driving licence in a scanner. We know who's in the venue. We've got lots of protections in place. What's your take on this phenomenon of having carded play and governments embracing this and imposing it on a bit of a domino effect around our country?
I think there's a very real concern that, and I think this has flowed out of the New South Wales panel inquiry that's just recently handed its report to the state government there. Most of these measures that keep being pushed by the anti-gambling groups, if you want, they largely are designed to impede casual players from an entertainment experience, while they really do very little to a problem gambler for finding an outlet to their gambling issues. And I think you'll find Sally Gainsbury, I think, was on the panel in New South Wales, been reported in the media. Sally's quite a well-regarded gambling academic from New South Wales. She's very concerned that there might be an unforeseen consequence and it might actually drive people's gambling problems rather than address them. And from our point of view, a lot of people use cash as a budget issue in terms of their own expenditure patterns, and you find that particularly with older individuals in the community. And if they're going to be forced to a cashless gaming model, there's a very real prospect that may actually force them into unintended expenditures, potentially.
Good point.
I think there's still a transition to go through the community in terms of totally embracing a cashless society. And I don't think you should be forcing people into that wedge. It should evolve over time. It inevitably will come, I think, more naturally. But if we're going to start forcing people into that outcome, I think you've been to the casino with me, Andrew, on a Friday night, and that place is like a barn. It's empty. People are stopping going to that casino because of their cashless system. And I think that will have the same effect on gamblers in terms of their desire to go into their local clubs and maybe spend a few dollars in a poker machine. The incentive for them to do online wagering will only exponentially increase.
I think you're right, Craig, and the casino still has had more compliance action instituted by the Gaming Commission here even after the carded play being implemented, which is a concern.
How do you see the use of facial recognition technology for clubs in regards to self-exclusion programs, etc.?
I feel sorry for anyone that's got to see my face on the screen, but I think the way it can play a positive role in terms of our marketplace is quite profound. We've been trying to get a trial for some time, but because we're a human rights jurisdiction and people like to talk about unintended consequences and other things, we've had a bit of a struggle to do that. But the system we were looking at is similar to what's used in South Australia and has been widely embraced down there. What that system did was it identified an 80% increase in self-exclusion breaches in that jurisdiction. So it manifestly played a significant role in helping people maintain their own self-exclusion from venues. And that's one of the positive benefits from it. But we're not talking about a surveillance system. As Andrew would know, I think all clubs have surveillance camera, CCTV systems within their premises, as many commercial premises do.
Yes, in Victoria, every single poker machine is under constant CCTV recording and surveillance by the staff. I totally agree with Craig's points. 2 years ago now, I visited ClubsACT and did a tour of venues in their state to do with the FRT system. It was highly successful and seemed to be, meeting everybody's needs to do with groups that are concerned to do with harm minimisation, protecting the clients. I think it's a good outcome.
I think it really comes down to consent issues a lot of the time on these debates, and that can be reasonably achieved without any great difficulty. But I think at the end of the day, we've got to accept that if you've got a self-exclusion system, you're going to need facial recognition technology to give robustness to it. Otherwise, you're relying on an individual to identify another patron's face off a database of any numbers of hundreds of people and then identify them for the purposes of excluding them from a venue, whereas the FRT systems allow you a more modern technological solution to that.
What do you think needs to change, Craig, in terms of industry-government collaboration?
Well, in terms of the broader issues, we certainly had some success in the lead-up to the recent ACT elections in getting all parties to agree to set up a club industry inquiry in the new year. And that's an independent inquiry, not a parliamentary inquiry, on the basis that we want facts on the table in terms of the social and economic impacts that our clubs provide to the community, and to have a look at a more evidence-based approach to some of the reforms that are being debated around us.
We're calling for our government here in Victoria to release the evaluation from the casino's implementation in Melbourne, because it's just weird from a project management methodology of why do you just continue rolling out a system to a whole state, a whole network of venues when you haven't actually ascertained or shared whether your initial model is actually meeting all the objectives. We're just saying pause. Don't rush this. Similar to what you're saying in your jurisdiction, have an inquiry, have an evaluation to ascertain the best way
and
to
make it
do
evidence-based.
Yeah, 100%. This ANU university data that's being trotted out as being so insightful and accurate to do with the prevalence of gambling issues and harm in the community. Press releases saying 30% of people showing signs of gambling harm for gambling products with EGMs. That's at odds with our Victorian Responsible Gambling Foundation's previous reports at far lower than that. So let's chat about research, which I think is something that is not well understood.
No, and it's something, as you know, that drives a lot of my thinking, Andrew, in terms of the debates that we have to engage in. And I regret the fact that your minister, I think, in Parliament quoted the ANU report that the ANU Centre released 2 weeks before our election in what seemed to be quite a cynical political exercise. And the basic underpinnings of that whole report were completely flawed, where they turned around and alleged that gambling reforms had achieved no impact in the ACT since 2015 on the basis that revenue was increasing in terms of the total machine revenue. And what they failed to do was actually apply CPI into their financial assessment. And the industry's actually endured a $39 million reduction, a loss, if you want, in terms of the revenue being generated, not a profit. So the basic financial underpinnings of their assessment make that whole report very questionable from my point of view. And I noticed that they haven't actually refuted any of the matters that we've raised in concerns about that. I put more store, frankly, in the figures that came from the Victorian organisations than I would in terms of what the ANU's been producing. And I think you find this a lot, Andrew, with the research side of the debate, where they're largely funded predominantly to promote anti-poker machine arguments. And so they go into these research exercises with dirty hands, if you want to put it that way, with a prejudged view on what they're trying to achieve. And lo and behold, they produce enormous amounts of data that seem to support their arguments for further reductions in patrons being able to use machines. I think we need a much more independent approach to the research. It seems to be a little bit more evidence-based than what we actually see coming out.
I agree with you, and we always used to ask of the VRGF, Victorian Responsible Gambling Foundation, that's now been wound up. Peer reviewing this is so important as well. Sample sizes, as you mentioned, looking at CPI, inflation, these sort of things as well. To have figures that are actually accurate and a true reflection is really important to do with informing government's policy on this. Because one thing that we've been saying, and I've been saying, is if you make changes and then you realise, it hasn't quite hit the mark, what do you do next? We're concerned hyper-regulation will force gambling dollars into the unregulated space, or where our regulators are least prepared to manage it. And that's going to be a risk into the future and something that we don't want to see to happen. We want the government's regulatory approach to work, and everything in life, as we know, is a balance. And that's our perspective on it, Craig.
I was just going to say, in terms of that 30% figure particularly that's bandied around, the basis of that is very questionable. I mean, and the way they interpret in terms of that prevalence survey approach, the issue of gambling, if you played a board game, you were a gambler. In the ACT, and just to talk about some statistics from our own Gambling and Racing Commission, they did an assessment and a report that came out only, I think, 2 years ago, that identified the fact that there's only 0.08% of the ACT population, which amounts to about 3,000 people, that fit the clinical definition of a problem gambler. And that's across all gambling types. So, we're talking quite small figures in terms of the overall community impact. But the regulatory impacts that they want to talk about introducing have a significantly much bigger blast radius than 3,000 people potentially in terms of gutting the funding for community sport and a range of other things, or the community groups to get funding directly in regards to their activities in dealing with mental health or otherwise. So there's a disbalance in here in terms of the debate and the assessments that are being made. And that's one of the reasons why we wanted this independent inquiry to take place.
Some great points, and I think that's transferable to the other jurisdictions around this country to do with gambling policy. It's something that there's lots of misinformation out there, and people that don't understand the difference between a club, a community club, not-for-profit, and its foundations and what it does compared to other organisations.
2025, Craig, what do you see as the big takeout issues and your desires?
Well, I think what we're really dealing with is the sunrise of a whole range of new technology options, John, that I think will be very important in terms of what they can provide as solutions to problem gambling. We often hear in the debates that the current regulatory interventions and safeguards are all bottom of the cliff outcomes as far as the anti-gambling advocates are concerned. I actually like to see us use new technology to get into debates about harm prevention rather than minimisation. How can we get to a problem gambler using developments in AI and otherwise before they actually start to get their problem manifesting? There's a whole range of things relating to facial recognition technology, for instance, that can identify facial movements on a person using a machine, that can actually identify whether that person's starting to exhibit changes in behaviour that are identifying they're developing gambling issues. There are a whole range of opportunities in this space, I think, if we can get some preparedness from government to actually trial and investigate. And that's one of the areas that I really want to focus on.
Totally agree with those comments. I think that is the way to also have some continuity, some parity across jurisdictions to do things together that work for all the parties.
That national approach is very important, Craig. You must sometimes pull your hair out thinking, if only we could all be as one.
Yeah, it's ludicrous in our environment in the ACT, which, as I said, it's like the Vatican City-State in the middle of the southern New South Wales area, that people in this town think they can achieve a result when they've only got to flash over the border, 5 seconds away to evade any of the regulation in the ACT. And I can remember growing up when the buses used to trip over from the Victoria border into New South Wales to use poker machines. I think we've really got to, and our industry is leading the debate and calling for a more national approach, particularly to self-exclusion and the broader harm minimisation framework. We are a national industry. There's a capacity to achieve results here. That's just that it seems that some of the political players in this space would rather try and outbid each other and get all emotional and catastrophic in the way they like to describe the debate. They don't necessarily want solutions. They want rhetoric to dominate rather than outcomes. But I think there's a real opportunity here with what's happened in Tasmania recently with their trial being deferred indefinitely. And it's funny for them because they're across the water, so they're a little bit more protected from some of what we're saying here. But along the eastern seaboard, Victoria, New South Wales, ACT, Queensland, there's a common interest there, I think, and South Australia, I shouldn't exclude them. There's a common interest there in saying how can we get best practice in all jurisdictions and even maybe set up a national self-exclusion database or approach so that people who are travelling between border locations can still have their self-exclusions apply.
Craig Shannon, CEO of ClubsACT, thank you so much for coming online today to have a chat to myself and to Andrew. And it's been fascinating to hear the differences and the various ways that you have to negotiate up in the ACT. Thank you for your time and wish you a very happy Christmas and a prosperous 25, mate.
Thanks, John. I hope you and your listeners and the clubs community in Victoria have a great holiday season and a safe one. Canberra's always got an interesting perspective because we are a little fantasy land here that the Canberra bubble is like to call it, but it should be a snow dome, really.
Thanks, Craig. Thanks for joining us today, and thanks for your support and your community work. You're a great man.
Well, I hope you enjoyed our special podcast today. As I said, a meeting of minds. Andrew Lloyd, Community Clubs Victoria CEO, and our special guest today, Craig Shannon, the CEO of ClubsACT. And I hope you'll join us again for our next CCV podcast. Thanks for listening.